In 1981, University of Minnesota psychologist Mark Snyder documented two fundamentally different approaches to social identity. The first group, roughly half the population, expressed their behavior primarily from their internal values and beliefs. They were, in the most straightforward sense, authentic. The second group operated differently. They scanned each social situation for signals about what was expected of them, adjusted their presentation accordingly, and experienced no particular psychological discomfort doing it. Snyder called them high self-monitors. In the realm of power, there is a documented, measurable gap between how these two groups are perceived, and it is not in favor of the authentic ones. The study of power, from Machiavelli's 16th century political analysis to Robert Greene's documentation of historical court dynamics, consistently arrives at the same uncomfortable observation. The social environment most people operate inside is not an honest exchange of capabilities and character. It is a performance context, with its own aesthetic standards, its own hierarchy of approved signals, and its own penalties for people who misread which performance the moment requires. Understanding this does not make you a manipulator. It makes you literate in the actual rules of the environment you are already in. Snyder's research identified what he termed social chameleons, individuals with high self-monitoring capacity who shift their expressed persona with notable fluency depending on the social context they are in. These individuals are not, in the clinical sense, deceptive. They are adaptive. They possess a refined ability to read what a situation calls for, and they respond to that reading rather than to their private internal state. What Snyder found, and what subsequent research confirmed, is that high self-monitors achieve measurably better social outcomes across a range of contexts. They are rated as more competent, more persuasive, and more effective in leadership roles, not because they are inherently more capable, but because they are more precisely calibrated to the expectations of the audience in front of them at any given moment. The psychological mechanism that enables this is what Paul Ekman and Wallace Friesen defined in 1975 as display rules, the social norms governing when and how emotions should be expressed. Skilled display rule management means minimizing the expression of distress when distress would be costly, amplifying the expression of warmth when warmth would be useful, and substituting one emotional signal for another when the genuine one would be disadvantageous. This is not a character flaw. It is a social skill, one that is distributed very unevenly, and whose absence is rarely identified as the source of its own costs. Niccolò Machiavelli, writing in the 16th century, made an observation that proved so politically uncomfortable, it was placed on the Church's index of forbidden books for over 2 centuries. He called it the effectual truth, the distinction between how people imagine social and political life to be and how it actually operates. His argument was not that morality is irrelevant, but that a person who governs their behavior entirely by moral ideals, in an environment where a significant number of people do not, will be consistently outmaneuvered by those who understand both sets of rules and can choose between them. This is not an invitation to abandon ethics. It is a call to situational literacy, the ability to read the actual incentive structure of a given context rather than the official one. The person who understands only the official rules of a system is at a permanent disadvantage to the person who understands both the official rules and the actual ones. Machiavelli's enduring relevance is not that he was cynical. It is that he was accurate. Robert Greene's first law of power, never outshine the master, documents a pattern so consistently reproduced across historical and contemporary contexts that its mechanism demands explanation rather than mere description. The most precisely documented case is Nicolas Fouquet, finance minister of France under Louis XIV in 1661. Fouquet was by every observable measure the most capable administrator in France. He was also fatally aware of it. In August of that year, he invited the young king to his newly completed estate at Vaux-le-Vicomte, a palace of such extraordinary beauty and scale that it made Versailles, the royal residence, appear modest by comparison. The guests included 6,000 people. The entertainment had been designed by Molière. The fireworks display was unprecedented. 3 weeks later, Louis XIV had Fouquet arrested on charges of embezzlement. He was tried, convicted, and imprisoned for life. The charges were not fabricated. There was genuine financial irregularity, but the timing and severity of the prosecution were almost universally understood by contemporaries as a consequence of the party. Fouquet had not done anything the court had not seen before. He had made the king feel diminished in a room full of witnesses. What the Fouquet case documents is not envy in its petty form. It is the structural threat that competence poses to authority when it becomes visible enough to invite comparison. The solution is not the concealment of capability, but the careful management of whose ego that capability appears to serve. Baldassare Castiglione, writing in 1528, identified what he considered the single most important quality of the skilled courtier. He called it sprezzatura, the capacity to make difficult things appear effortless, to perform skill without displaying the labor that produced it. His argument was specific. When a person reveals the mechanism behind an achievement, they reduce it to technique. When the mechanism is concealed and the result simply appears, it becomes something closer to natural authority, a quality that is attributed rather than demonstrated, which is precisely what makes it more powerful. The related principle of strategic silence operates on the same logic. The person who talks less produces two results simultaneously. They reveal less information about their own position, vulnerabilities, and thinking. Information that in a competitive context is immediately available to be used against them. And they create a silence that others are compelled to fill, often volunteering precisely the information that the silent party needed. Franklin D. Roosevelt, widely documented as one of the most politically skilled communicators of the 20th century, routinely used extended silences in meetings to extract commitments from advisors who felt compelled to elaborate in the face of no response. The point is not that silence is inherently powerful. It is that the automatic impulse to fill silence with explanation, justification, and elaboration is a highly legible pattern, and legible patterns are the primary target of anyone seeking to map your position. The most structurally revealing case in Machiavelli's Prince is Cesare Borgia's management of the pacification of Romagna in the early 1500s. Borgia needed to impose order on a lawless region. He appointed Ramiro de Orco, a man specifically selected for his willingness to use severe measures, to govern with absolute authority. De Orco imposed order through methods that were, by any standard, brutal. The population came to hate him personally. When order was established and the hatred had concentrated sufficiently around De Orco, Borgia had him arrested, tried, and executed, his body displayed in the town square. Machiavelli documents the reaction of the populace. They were, in his words, at once satisfied and stupefied. The cruelty that had produced the order they now enjoyed was attributed to a man who was gone. The mercy that ended it was attributed to Borgia. What this case illustrates is a structural pattern that recurs in organizational contexts at every scale. The separation between the person who makes a decision and the person who implements it can be engineered in ways that concentrate accountability asymmetrically. The ethical implications of this pattern are considerable. What makes it worth studying is that it operates whether or not you are the person designing it, and the person who cannot identify when they are in the De Orco role is at a structural disadvantage to the person who can. What Machiavelli Greene, Castiglione, and Snyder are collectively documenting is not a set of techniques for getting ahead at other people's expense. They are documenting the actual operating conditions of human social environments. Environments that have been in place for as long as humans have organized themselves into hierarchies, which is to say, always. The discomfort that arises from studying this material comes from the collision between two things: the ethical framework most people were taught to apply to social interactions, and the descriptive reality of how those interactions actually operate. The study of power does not resolve that collision. It makes it more visible, which is arguably the more honest position. Understanding that social environments have performance. Logics does not require abandoning your values. It requires understanding what those values cost in specific contexts and making that decision consciously rather than having it made for you by your own unawareness of the rules. The person who has never studied power is not outside the game. They are simply playing it without knowing the score. Control is found in the gaps between your words, and in the understanding that the gaps themselves are a choice. The next pattern we are covering is what the person who has mastered all of these principles looks like from the outside, and why they are so difficult to identify before the cost becomes clear. That video is linked here.